This is Season 3, Episode 12 of my Modular Journey, and today I'm taking a look at the Pamela's Pro workout module. This is the third generation of this Pamela series. You can see she's got 3 legs now. I picked up the ALM Busy Circuits Pamela's Pro Workout Master Clock and Modulator around November 18th of 2022. It cost $339 US, so it's pretty pricey, but it also is very extensive. Defined as a compact, programmable, clocked modulation source for Eurorack modular synthesizer systems, the Pro has most of the previous version's features, including a BPM-based clock with tempos between 10 and 303 beats per minute, precisely, capable of switching the output pulse config from a standard 24 pulses per quarter note with a range of 1 pulse per quarter note up to 48 pulses per quarter note, in case you need to compensate for other gear that may require a non-standard 22 ppqn pulse config. The Pro also has the same 8 clocked voltage output sources with clock dividers and multipliers ranging from a staggering divided by 16,384 of a pulse, which is ridiculous, to a speedy times 192 speed, which in my opinion is indistinguishable to the human ear. The astonishing part of the Pamela's workout modules that I admit I did not discover existed for literally weeks after owning the original module here is that per channel setups are revealed under a long press of this program button, including things like waveform types, level offset, phase and slew controls, extensive Euclidean pattern generation, and new to the Pamela's Pro workout, specifically a cross-modulation output, flex micro-timing options, additional CV inputs, now totaling 4 if you do not use the incoming clock and run as a CV3 and 4 input, and support for other expander modules with more expanders coming soon from ALM Busy Circuits. The one thing I did notice is there are less memory storage slots on the Pro workout versus the new over here. The new had 8 channels of A through Z to store programs in. This has 7 banks of 8, or a total of 56. And I'm assuming that's because the Pro grew so much larger in its per-channel programmability, sacrifices just had to be made somewhere. And the 8x26 storage was more than any hobbyist like me needed, so I'm good with the now 7 banks of 8, or 56 total slots to save my configurations. While Pamela's Pro workout is indeed a true workhorse, like its previous version, Pamela's Pro is also unlikely to actually improve aerobic fitness. For you voltage freaks out there, the 8 outputs are 0 to 5 volts buffered, and the inputs are also 0 to 5 volts for clock and run. This is important because this labels Pro, like new, as a unipolar module, only dealing out positive voltages. And if you want modulations to sweep into the negative voltages, you'll have to offset the output using an attenuverter, like this one, also by ALM Busy Circuits. As for why I chose the Pro workout, well, that's pretty simple, right? I already own the Pamela's new workout here. The Pro is a newer version, and since Pamela's has been my official clock source, and as I stated in my previous video for Pamela's new workout, she is literally the heartbeat of my entire modular system. About a year into my journey, I had on my wish list to buy a second Pamela's new workout clock modulation source for my now growing separate sequencer rack. I was dragging my feet on buying the second module, not for any other reason than really laziness, I suppose, when all of a sudden in November of 2022, Busy Circuits announced the release of Pamela's Pro, which was great for my own laziness, is that I waited long enough to where instead of picking up another new version, I got the Pro version here. The release announcement was November 18th, 2022, and before that 10-minute video even completed, I had my order placed with Perfect Circuit. So as far as how I plan to use the Pro, I have one clock source for the main modular rack, this is actually a baby rack. The big rack is over across the room. So I have one clock source in here. I have another clock source now for the sequencer rack. I normally use one output out of Pamela's to be the clock pulse that drives literally everything in my modular. Sometimes I'll take out the one output and put it into a buffered mult like this one here. If I stick the output into one of the top mults, I have 9 outputs here to drive clocking for anything in the rack, including all of the sequencers. If you daisy chain the clocks together, another channel goes to things like disting or monsoon to sync up those delays or those effects modules to the clock as well. That's basically how I've always used Pamela's new workout, and now I've got the Pro. And how these are going to sit, and they have sit, you probably have seen this in other videos up till now. One sits up here in the demo rack, the other one sits down here in the sequencer rack. And that's it. That's kind of how I plan to use them. So what I want to do for this demo, I'm going to do this a little different than normal. I'm going to get this in the rack, and as I go through the features of Pro, I'm going to just do the audio at the same time because this will be a very long video if I try to keep these two things separate. Let's get Pamela's Pro workout in the rack. Let's get some power to this rack. All right. So the first thing I want to talk about, of course, is the top menu, which you get to at the BPM screen. If you long press for a second or so, it gets you into this top level menu where it's full color, high resolution display that is no longer LED dots, but beautiful color and themed UI display. So if you come to UI theme and rotate it, you can pick a number of color themes. So that's kind of neat. I want something that you'll be able to see, so I'm going to actually stick with PAM 1. Can you see that? I hope you can see that on the screen. The run option on the Pro has a lot more features added to it than on the previous version over here. Before, you used to be able to send in triggers to rotate your channels around, so that way one output, like A would become B, and B would become C, etc. if you start sending in triggers through it. But this one here allows you to send in also a reset signal, make it a CV signal, and then of course rotate all of the channels. So that way you're shuffling things constantly, which is pretty great for generative music. On the channel menus, this is where the massive changes and enhancements have occurred. First, let's talk about the modifiers here. At the top level, you have your multipliers. So if you quickly press once and turn the knob, you can see you get up to 192 speed. So what that looks like, let me hit start. See the blinkies blinking, right? So if you turn it up to 2 times the speed, this channel is blinking twice as fast as this channel. So that's pretty fast. But now if you go up to 192 speed, it's just a blur. I don't know what on earth I would ever use that for, but maybe somebody watching this video can tell me what use I would have of 192 speed. You're taking 1 quarter note, so 1 beat of a 4-beat pulse, and you're timesing it up 192 times. That's inconceivable. However, my favored side of the clock multiplier divider is, of course, the dividers, because this is where, again, my generative world lives, is starting to make things slower at all these very interesting off-tempo times. Things start out normal, and then they get gradually more insane as you go, the further you go down the line here. The biggest divider being 16,384. So imagine 1 quarter note being divided by that speed. That's probably hours, I would imagine. Let's just sit here and watch and see how long it takes this to blink over. Just kidding. I won't do that to you. So where things get really nuts is, again, just like on the new workout module over here, I didn't even realize that on the channel config, you can long press and get into this entire submenu of stuff. I did not even know this for weeks after owning Pamela's new workout 2.5 years ago. Pamela's was my first module I ever purchased. I started my modular journey with a clock and an oscillator. Getting back to the modern day, here we are with, we have shapes. Pamela's new workout had a lot of shapes as well, but Pamela's Pro has even more. Shape used to be called wave over on the old module. Now it's called shape. It is a gate pulse wave, a ratchet times 2, a ratchet times 4, a triangle, a trapezoid, a sine wave, something called a hump, an exponential-like envelope, a logarithmic-like envelope, the classic sample and hold, and a smooth slew random shape. Let me show you what this sounds like, because to me, looking at it is one thing, but hearing it is another. So let me plug somebody in. I'll probably use plates. Let's go into FX Aid. Let me try to keep the wires out of the way. Let me grab a short wire out of here. I'm going to take channel 1, which is the channel we're working on. I'm going to stick it right here into volt per octave. So that's what a gate pulse would sound like if it were making audio. Let's change that shape. So now here's a ratchet times 2. And here's a ratchet times 4. And again, if we wanted to slow that down so you could hear it a little more, I'd come out to the outside and maybe multiply it by 4 or divide it by 4. So now you can hear it actually doing the 4 ratchets. Moving forward. So here is a triangle shape. And here is a trapezoid shape, which all that means is a quick rise, a plateau, and then a fall. Here is a sine wave. And here's our hump. Sound very strange. And of course we have our exponential envelope, which I'll talk more about later when we get into other parameters. Then here's our logarithmic envelope. And here comes our sample and hold. In this case, I'm going to speed things up. So this is an unquantized sample and hold, by the way. And then, of course, what the slew sounds like. So that's kind of nuts. So that's just what the shapes. That's just what the shapes sound like, as far as audio goes. You could use these. Of course, it's just voltage, so you can use these for modulating anything in the modular, including these could be LFO shapes or whatever. The next parameter is kind of interesting. If you're out of edit mode and you rotate down, you get to the next parameter called width. But width has a multi-purpose. When you're already in a slewed shape or in any of these other shapes, width is called width. But if you're in the random specifically, with the sample and hold here, width has a slew option, which again sounds a little like this until you start raising the slew. So all it's doing is it's applying a percentage of slew to the random shape. So here, let me do one more thing here. I need to configure a second output. So I'm going to use output 2. Let me hop back out here and go to output 2. I'm going to change this one to be that gate option. It'll help me silence plates. So to finish what I was saying about this slew parameter, all it does is really help round out the rough edges on the randomness. Divided by 4. So this is 0 volts to 5 volts, 0 volts to 5 volts. That's quite a range. If I come in here to the level option, which is the next one down, if I rotate this way down to like 20%, this is now 1 volt, because Pamela's again is putting out 5 volts, so 20% of 5 volts is 1 volt. So this is how I can say I want to limit the range of output. If I want it to be higher, I would then rotate over here to offset and raise offset. So this is a way, I guess, you could also program, or you could tune these outputs to whatever your oscillator is. It's not super fine-tuned. This is when a quantizer might come in handy, which we'll talk about later. You know, I should probably have turned on data. Well, let me turn on my oscilloscope. Completely forgot to turn that guy on. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to get into the oscilloscope here. I'm going to take the voltage we're watching down into the oscilloscope data. And then I want to come out of data back up here just so we have a pass through. To show what phase actually does, I'm going to bring in another sine wave to data down here. All right, after a little bit of fumbling around, I've got data here now configured with 2 channels, 2 sine waves. Let me turn off the sound so you don't have to listen. What you have right now is you see channel 3 is the full 0 to 5 volts. Channel 1 is just the 0 to 1 volt. So you can see the differences on what the waveforms look like, but they are in sync with each other. They both hit the bottom at the same time. They both hit their top at the same time. So now if I come back to this channel 1 again and I go to phase, I'm going to rotate phase dramatically to like 50%. And now you can see on data, the rise and fall are 50% off. You're basically shifting where the start and stop of the waveform is. So that's pretty cool because, again, you can have multiple channels all out of phase with each other, so they kind of are doing different things. It's pretty helpful, probably not musically with audible, because I think audibly it sounds terrible. But phase, I believe, comes in pretty handy when you're modulating other things in the rack, like filters and envelopes and volumes and panners, things like that. All right, so I'm going to reset channel 2 to be just a gate on and off. But now if I go in here to the probability, I'm going to turn this down. So now watch the light blinking here. This is the probability that a gate is going to open at all to let the sound through plates. So it's just a way to add some randomness to the channel. You can, and again, out here you can slow this way down to make things sound even more random and slower and more generative. I think that's pretty cool. In my opinion, one of the most powerful aspects of Pamela's is the Euclidean Patterns parameters. Once this is set to greater than 0 steps, additional menu options do appear. So like if you rotate down now, you see loops or beats. But as soon as you do one thing here, you now get triggers, pads, shift, and then loops again. So first, if you do not know what Euclidean geometry is, don't worry. I've been living in that same cave for 2,500 years right next to you. What is amazing about this is that as late as 2004, Common Era, a guy named Godfrey Toussaint discovered quite literally that patterns could be generated using Euclidean math and applied to music rhythms, such as percussion. In a paper I will link in the description, the general premise is that you take a pattern length, say 8 steps, and the idea is to drop beats equidistant from each other within that 8 steps. Well, I think one of the most popular uses of Euclidean patterns in modular is percussion. Let me set up 16 steps with a pattern of 5 triggers, 0 loops. All right, so you kind of hear that, right? Let's go to loop beats now. And I'm going to set the loop to 1. So if you can see on the little dots here, it hits that first beat at step 1, but before it gets to beat 2, it loops back around to the first beat. So all we're really doing is listening to the trigger, re-triggering repeatedly. This is super confusing to me. I know what's going on audibly in my ears, and that's kind of how I tend to do a lot of this stuff, is just by what sounds good. I don't really do the math in my head. But the thing I wanted to move on to was some of the newer features in Pamela's pro workout that were not in Pamela's new workout, and that is things like once you start looping beats, there are things called nap and wake and shift. So first let's look at nap. This one is oddly defined in the manual as it states the number of complete loops to sleep the output. At first I thought this meant it would sleep only the loop beats that I had previously configured, but instead the words complete loops in fact means the entire pattern sleeps for n loops. So setting this to 2, for example, makes 2 complete loops of the Euclidean pattern silent. So this is also pretty fantastic for that generative vibe. So to hear what that sounds like, let's start our annoying pattern again. I'm just going to switch this to 2. And then I'm going to rotate back just so you can see the pattern. So if you watch the dot blazing along the top, it's playing 1 round, and then 2 rounds is silent. So that's with a nap of 2. Means it plays 1, and the next 2 are silent. Now the loop wake, which is the next parameter up, is it adds even more fun to the patterning and looping of a channel. This is how many loops before taking a nap. So I can loop beats 3, nap 2, and wake 3, and see this trippy output. So let's wake 3. Let's rotate back to the Euclidean so we're watching it. So see how it just did 3, sleeps 2, does 3, and sleeps 2. That's pretty cool. Look, I just want to get away from this section of this module because it is driving my brain crazy. I can't take it. Moving along to the next one called the cross-op. Here's where this module goes completely batty. I will not dive into all of these options because it's just way too much, but here's what I understand from cross operations to mean. This can influence the current channel's output with values from another channel or a CV source from up here. Looking at an example from the manual, you can mix a rising and falling triangle on channel 2 with a peak and ratchet from channel 1, giving you this rising ratchet shape that depends on how you have channel 2 patched, can raise and lower the pitch, for example, with dynamic falls from the ratcheting signal. Holy balls. Do I want to do this? Well, let me set one up real quick. Let's see. So for the cross operation, I'm going to set up channel 1 to simply be a triangle. And because I already have some stuff going on here with channel 3, I'm going to come over here. I'm going to set channel 3's shape to be that ratchet times 4. So the idea is to take what's going on channel 3 and apply it to channel 1. So the first thing you have to do is switch cross-op from none to something. And then you rotate down 1 and you pick whatever your output is. So in this case, I'm using the output of 3 to affect what's going on 1. And in this case, I'm using something called a mix. So what I've done to set up this really quick demo of how channel 3 can affect what's going on channel 1 is I just set it to mix, and I have the shape in channel 1 being a triangle. I have the shape in channel 3 being a 4 times ratchet. And so what you should hear when I hit go is you should hear a mix of the triangle rising and falling, but getting ratchets throughout. So let's hear that. This is just one of 17 cross operation modes that you can be in, which is why I am not going to talk about this in depth. I'm just going to rotate the knob through to show you how many different settings there are in this. And that was a terrible demonstration of what this is doing because you can't possibly tell the difference. But trust me, it is really extensive. And honestly, this just blows my mind about this module, how much stuff is packed in here. It is way more than just a clock, which is what I bought the first one for 2 years ago. I thought I just needed a clock. Well, I got a whole lot more. This thing generates some crazy amounts of voltage. The next new option in Pamela's Pro workout is something called Flex Op. And these can be thought of as micro-timings, which can be subtle or, as the manual states, lead to chaos at its extremes. Again, there's a lot of options here, so I'm only going to shout them out in this video. Starting with something let's rotate down, something called Human. And again, once you enable Flex Op to be more than 0, you get additional options. I decided to rewire up to use drums percussion a little bit here, just to make it a little bit more obvious what the offsets are going to sound like using the Flex Op parameters here. So again, I'm not going to detail all of these out. I'm just going to run through a few of them real quick just to see what this sounds like. So I'm going to start with just a kick and a hi-hat here. I'm going to turn on Human. And then I can rotate down to the amount. If you listen really carefully, you can hear the downbeat of the kick and the hi-hat drifting. Now, in the old Pamela's new workout, I believe this setting was called slop, but somebody must have gotten offended, so now they call it being human. So setting it back to 0% means this human is infallible. Now you have your typical settings like swing. And again, you can set your swing amount. Ramp up gradually increases the step time. Ramp down gradually decreases the step time. And of course, hump rises to a peak of tempo and then falls off. That's kind of neat. Then once it reaches its peak, it'll start falling off. That's kind of cool. That's pretty cool. And then the last one here is called delay. And this used to be a standalone, like out in the main channel configs. All it just simply means is to delay the triggering by a percentage. You could delay it by 50% to stay kind of in tempo. Anyway, that's kind of what the Flex Op does. Is it, again, it's just allows you to add some micro timings to your outputs. So the next one here is called Invert, which literally means whatever shape is coming out, invert it. So how to look at that, we'll actually just look at it on the scope. Let's set a triangle for both of these channels. Channel 1 and 2. But channel 2, I'm going to invert. All right, so now if we look at data down here when I press go, you can see You can see the patterns, the rise and fall of triangle 1 is inverted from triangle 2. So that's all the invert does. All right, so if we go back to our original setup here where the channel 1 is doing pitches into plates and channel 2 is doing triggers into plates, and I turn up my volume. All right, it kind of sounds like this, a little plucky. What I want to do on channel 1, which is my pitches, is I want to scroll down to Quantizer. So this is, as I wrote in my notes, it's your typical average everyday quantizer. So in this case, I'm going to set it to a major scale. And so just like that, my little pluckies are now in tune, theoretically. So right now it's generating pitches in what it knows to be a major scale. If you rotate it to minor, a harmonic minor, and so forth. So it's just a way to now quantize the pitch values coming out of Pamela's if you wanted to use it as a sequencer. Back to a major. And so forth. One of the last new things I would say that is in Pamela's Pro workout is this option for a scope. So you can watch the scope right here instead of using data like I do. But I tend to like watching the things like the Euclidean Patterns instead. This is the scope of the gates being generated on channel 2. And if I want to go back to channel 1, here's the last feature I think I can really talk about. Is a new feature is to press and hold the start and stop button and rotate the knob. We'll switch to channel 1 or 2, 3, 4, 5 up to 8. So that's pretty neat to be able to jump between the channels instead of doing what you've seen me do this entire demo is long press, rotate, long press, rotate, long press. That's how you can jump between any of the channels pretty quickly, is just by long pressing the start and stop and rotating the program knob. Oh, and there's another one. There's another thing I forgot about. If you are holding this and you tap the encoder, it actually mutes the channel you're on. So if you wanted to shut off that annoying gate, so you stop hearing my terrible song. So it adds a little bit, without stopping the entire module, you can actually mute a specific channel. So that's kind of neat as well. I think that's it for Pamela's Pro workout. That was a very long video for me. I barely scratched the surface of what it does. I did kind of fly through the highlights. So sorry about all the missing details, but this isn't a thorough deep dive or walkthrough. This is just why I bought it, how I plan to use it, and pointing out some of the cool new features like cross-op and flex-op. So that's it for the Pamela's Pro workout. Clock, modulation, everything in a box, Swiss Army knife of modular. Absolutely love these modules. I've loved the first Pamela's new workout for 2.5 years. I've had the Pro for about a year now, and regardless of people's sensitivities, this is the heartbeat of my modular rack. So coming up next, I think what's coming up next is the Wogglebug down here. So we'll be taking a look at Wogglebug next, so stay tuned for that.